Welcome back to the Tech Baddie podcast. I'm joined today by my good friend, Eric Mariasis. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, of course. Great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Eric, I love your story. I think that what you're doing is so cool. And you're the first person that actually does professional coaching. I've talked to people who do mentorship kind of out of the goodness of their heart because they've been around for a while. But there's definitely a deficit and a need for that, as I know that you know this, but especially since the pandemic and the shift with this tough market, there are a lot of people trying to break into the space. And I think people are being told a lot of varying formats of advice, steps that they should be taking, and sometimes it can feel like a lot of noise. So while you're here today, I want to talk about some of the biggest things that you see some of your students face.
Yeah, of course. Well, so I think the first thing I want to mention about getting into software is that the most common mistake I see by far is that people give up too early.
Okay.
I think there's definitely a narrative out there that, you learn a little bit of code in one language, then you can make, over $100,000 a year in a job. But that's not how it works. I mean, there's a reason that it pays, and it does require a lot of work. It requires, some degree of struggle, although, one of my goals as a tutor is to make sure that people don't struggle aimlessly for too long, spinning their wheels.
Right.
But yeah, but I think it's about, helping people understand that, first of all, I hear a lot of people ask, what language should I learn? What framework should I do first? And the reality is, if a language or framework is on at least one job description on one job board, you can't really go wrong. It's just about starting, getting that momentum. So in terms of tutoring, a lot of people I help are either taking courses related to software. Sometimes I'm freelancing, working with people on their projects. But I think the key is starting. And I think probably the most common thing that people face is kind of getting over that hurdle of, when I'm stuck, it's not necessarily that the field of software isn't for me. It's that, I'm just kind of struggling with something. It takes practice.
Absolutely. As you know, I took the bootcamp route whenever I decided to get into this field. And I get asked a lot about that. And I don't really know what your opinion is, but I'm always telling people, like, just because I felt that was the best path for me. And I happened to have a very positive bootcamp experience. Like, if I could go back, I would have done the same thing over again. But I am probably the first person to say I don't necessarily think that that's always the answer. And I think one of the biggest issues too, just as you said, I think that people are told and sold this notion of, hey, take this course, join this bootcamp, whatever, you'll get hired by Google in 3 weeks, 6 months, fill in the blank, whatever timeline they sort of include in their sales pitch. And I do think that it does disillusion a lot of people who don't actually understand what it takes to get into this industry.
Yeah, so I personally have not gone the boot camp route, but based on everything I know about it, it's probably more similar to like a university path than you might think, in the sense that a lot of probably why you got a lot out of boot camp is because you're driven and you put in the work. I think, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to people's outlook about it. Like if someone's going to go in and expect, their hand held the whole time, like everything done for them, they probably won't get quite as much out of it as if they realize, that the struggle will still be there even with help from a boot camp. So, that's probably part of the reason it has sort of mixed reviews. But I think also sometimes the way that maybe they sell themselves could put people off. But I'm sure there are benefits. I mean, a lot of, great people have come out of boot camps, like look at yourself. So
I love how you pointed out, the truth is, yes, about the mindset. Like, I put in the work, I made that decision, like, okay, no matter what, I'm going to get that certificate. So I'm not going to fail, even if it's hard, even if I don't like it. And it turns out I did enjoy it, even though there were times where it was very stressful and tight deadlines. For me, it just reinforced, okay, like, this is definitely something that I'm taking pride in what I'm learning. I'm enjoying the projects that I'm building. And I love seeing the dots connect as the pieces fall together. And so that was very rewarding for me. And so again, sort of back to your mentoring and your coaching, just as you said, like, people, I think, get overwhelmed with, what language do I pick? What about this framework? Getting intimidated by AI, because, there are always people who are saying, don't even bother, right? Because AI is going to take your jobs, or fill in the blank. And so what do you say to people who come to you with those sort of fears or mental blockages?
Yeah, well, so I think the first thing I want to quickly touch upon is the AI piece, since that's probably the most common thing talked about in wider society. So, one thing I'll say to that is it's far more likely for your job to be taken by a human who knows how to navigate AI than it is to have your job taken by an actual like AI
Right.
entity itself.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I won't deny that there are some industries where that will and are happening with, but kind of like any evolution in technology, the jobs sort of change. It's not like people get, kicked out of their jobs and then like there's no work for anybody. I mean, with, the removal of certain kinds of work will be the addition of other kinds of work. And arguably, there'll be more work overall for everybody, as long as, they're willing to adapt with change and, can get help with that. Um,
People get
yeah,
inundated with I think all of the noise with you touched on this earlier, choosing the right language, and then constant
oh
new
yeah.
frameworks coming out too.
Right. Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say, like, if you're completely confused about where to start, aside from looking at job descriptions, I would literally like go through the contacts on your phone or your address book or however you have people and think, is there anybody I know who is working in software or who might know about software? And can I, reach out to speak with them about the field? And, chances are that one of them will. And if not, then go another step and say, like, if none of the people in that list meet that criteria, then you can say, do they themselves know another person who might
Yeah.
be good to talk to? Or you can, sort of ask people. And then I think by then, chances are you will have encountered at least one or two people that you can reach out to and say, what got you interested in software? What are you learning? Can you describe what you like about it and what you don't like? But I think the most important thing is coming at it with a mindset of curiosity and giving what you can rather than only asking for a favor.
Right.
I think I know not everybody listening to this probably uses LinkedIn, but a common thing is people reaching out and saying, "Here's my resume," without any context, and that's not as likely to be successful as if you try to offer something to the other person, even if it's simple gratitude and saying thank you and having a curious outlook.
Yeah, I love the point that you touched on about trying to have conversations with real people. So for me, that was such a big hurdle for me because whenever I decided to sign up for my boot camp, I didn't know anyone in the tech space. I'd had the same career for over a decade. Like I was so in that world and not connected with anyone in the tech space at all. And I also was not a networker. I didn't have connections to reach out to on LinkedIn or any other platform to have those kind of real conversations. And I think that's sort of another deficit too is kind of goes hand in hand with the tutorial hell. You can also find yourself just going through these online forums, whether it's Reddit or anything else that just are yapping about the industry, whether it's good or bad or the things that you should be doing. But it's not the same, I think, as having that real conversation with a person.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, I can speak for myself. Well, one hurdle that I had when getting into software, and I didn't realize I had it until a lot later, was, when you go to school, for the most part, like maybe you work in teams sometimes, but for the
Hmm.
most part, you're kind of like looking up things on your own, like doing your own research, kind of like in your dorm room or in the library or whatever. And that's kind of how you're conditioned to learn. And then if someone coming out of school wants to learn about software, they think they should sort of apply the learning style that they've been doing and try to do it on their own. And that's fine. You can get a certain amount of far on that, but the reality is in a field like software, it is both you'll have a higher chance of being successful and it'll be more fun if you talk to other people about it. Like one thing that keeps me doing some software things just outside of my job is like the communities I'm part of and the people I interact with both online and in person.
Yeah, yeah, and also too, there's just a very powerful thing about talking to other human beings that have those similar interests, right? Or maybe can relate to. Oh, I was there at one point. That's been my most encouraging thing, actually, as a fresher who just joined this industry in February of last year, was talking to people and then sharing some of my doubts or some of my hurdles, and they're like, "That's literally so normal. Like, don't worry about it. We all make mistakes and everything." And even in my first freelance gig, which I just landed, oh my gosh, at the start of the new year, and I'm very excited about. But yeah, my first push of code in GitHub, I accidentally pushed 100,000 plus files, and all I was
Uh,
trying to do is edit the README. Eric, like
yeah.
that is literally my one task. And I was like, I'm just gonna edit this, and then I, because I didn't want to get fired, was like
Yeah.
trying to Google how to revert and undo it, hoping he wouldn't see. And then finally he messaged me. My boss is the nicest person ever. He's such a godsend. And he's like, hey, what you doing? And I was like, nothing.
Hey, if you want, we could have a follow-up podcast about common Git pitfalls. The act of ignoring certain files is, yeah, that's a common thing if you
Sure.
haven't used Git a lot. But yeah, but that's wonderful. Congrats on the freelance gig. That'll be huge. You have a lot of things to show if you, at some point you want to work at like a full-time regular job as well. So
Sure. Yeah. And just again, for any listeners, I am currently looking for a full time opportunity, but the freelance has been honestly a really good way for me to get my feet wet and get in the space post boot camp. Because for me, post boot camp, it was all of a sudden I didn't have any deadlines, right? I was just sort of left to the whim of my own continued learning. And that was even difficult too, because there is so much in software. And it's like I didn't want to waste my time focusing on the wrong things. And actually, that is, I think, a good topic to kind of go on is what happens after you finished, even if it's not a boot camp, but your Udemy course, or you've done all of John Crickett's coding challenges, for
yeah.
instance, right? I mean, what do you do then if you're still looking for work and haven't landed an opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say a couple of things, and I'm mainly going off of like kind of what I wish I did at the beginning that I didn't do. But I mean, so one suggestion is, kind of in line with what we were talking about earlier, kind of like keep your network alive, like talk to people, especially those people who are doing something that at least you think you might be interested in, or
Mm-hmm.
even better, if you know for sure what kind of role you want, then, interact with communities of people that work on that. Like for example, for me, I'm really interested in AI and machine learning. So that's one thing, but also I think it's easy to fall into a trap, especially nowadays with seeing all these positions online that are hiring and sending your resume to tons and tons of places. It feels effective and it feels like you're making progress. And even in my last job search, I kind of fell into that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the real way these days to get jobs is to focus on a few positions that you're really interested in, and try to do some work that demonstrates that you're a quality candidate. Because the reality is, even though you're doing work maybe to get into that role, that work can be applied to other places too that are
Sure.
doing the thing you're interested in. So it could benefit your portfolio, and I think that's where it's at. And also I suggest, if possible, if there's something near your area, to like go to in-person events, because there is something special about that in-person connection that can't quite be replicated in online communities.
Yeah. Yeah. And straight along that thought line, when it comes to applying to jobs, and I think a lot of people, of course, I know not everyone in the audience, as you said, may even be active on LinkedIn or use it, but it is globally known as the job connection networking platform, right? If you're looking for work, that's why a lot of people even create a LinkedIn in the first place. Most people don't do it just because they want to scroll through billions of articles and
Yeah.
people's businessy thoughts. But there is power, as I've come to learn. And it's so funny too, the growth that I faced on LinkedIn was not my intention. All I wanted was a job and to meet some people that could help me out. And I'm very blessed to say it's sort of blossomed into something else. And now I'm at the point where even if I get full-time employment, like I'm not letting go of that network, because for me it's a long-term thing and things change over time. And the relationships I'm building now, you never know what doors can open down the line. And so there's also, of course, the actual job application process through LinkedIn that has its own job board. And I think a lot of people, just as you said, it can feel good to sling out your resume and even hit the LinkedIn quick apply. And I got to be honest, Eric, I spent 1.5 months really aggressively doing that. And I was like, I don't like this. It was not even just because of the lack of response, although that was a big part of it, but it just felt so soul sucking to me. I don't know. I felt like such a little cog in this vast nebulous internet thing, and it just did not feel good.
Yeah, so if you picture a trash bin in space with an open bottom, and then you put your resume into that, that's pretty much what quick apply is on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Yeah, no, yeah, again, it can feel good, and I mean, there it can be valuable to do that in the sense of you know what kinds of positions are out there, and it can kind of get you in the mindset of applying to jobs. Like maybe, you know, I don't necessarily recommend that people do zero applying online, but
Sure,
maybe
sure.
maybe set like a limit just to get yourself in the mode, and then you know, ideally if you have a certain kind of position you're interested in, you know, hone in on that, and like, you know, I try to do the higher effort things to get that role. If you want to be successful, especially, you know, to stand out these days. I mean, like
Yeah,
on LinkedIn, for example, or Indeed or any job board, you know, the second it's posted, you see like, you know, 100 applications. It's like that
sure.
they're probably not even going to look at most of those, to
Yeah.
be honest.
I mean,
So.
again, 10 years as a recruiter, even though it wasn't in tech, and it's like at our firm, I would personally look over every resume that we received. I worked in the manufacturing space, so we didn't have AI do it in our particular situation, but when I tell you I spent like 5 seconds probably looking through a resume before it's probably a no. And of course, if I'm thinking, okay, maybe the no will get a few more seconds of my attention, but just the reality of that, yeah, it is very saturated. And so, okay, so you're past the application standpoint. You get an email back or even a call or a LinkedIn DM. Someone wants to interview you, especially for people who are newer to this industry or maybe even looking to land their first role. What advice do you have?
Yeah, I mean, you know, first off, I think the first thing to do is simply acknowledge, like, you know, be kind and show gratitude and say, you know, thank you so much. Like this position's very interesting. And, you know, if you can say, you know, what interested you about it, it's even better. But
Sure.
if they reach out back to you, then clearly there was something about you or your application or your resume that intrigues their interest. So actually, one thing I do like to recommend is in any probably any interview, but especially in the first stage, kind of ask, you know, what was it about my resume that sort of intrigued you to learn more?
That's
And
great.
yeah, and that's interesting not only because it's a curious thing to know, but because you kind of can learn how to tailor your answers to their later questions. Like if they say, I'm intrigued in like your AWS cloud experience, then you might want to like think about ways to answer the questions to highlight that. But if
Yes.
they're like, you know, oh, I love that you did JavaScript, then, and also for people listening who aren't in software, these are just like software things. But yeah. um, but yeah, so that, and then there's also a difference between if you want to work for like a startup versus say a
Sure.
bigger company. So if you want to work for a company like Google or Netflix, like one of those bigger companies, then I would look into their well-established interview processes and like go through the steps to prepare.
Mm,
You know, they're sort of like doing leak code, and there's a lot of documentation about how to prepare. But if you want to work for another company, then it may be, you know, sort of a more practical interview process or a more like talking based kind of thing.
mhm.
But
All of the interviews that I've landed up till now have, funny enough, come from my LinkedIn connections, from my network and people reaching out to me because they were seeing me and as a person. And I found that those interview processes, thankfully, were so much more interpersonal. I love that. That's just my opinion. I feel so much better with that too. It can also because for me, I'm also getting a feel for the culture, and if I'm going to be working with these people, I would ideally like for it to be that kind of fit. So, in my opinion, there is also power with your own, I'll say, personal branding. That can sometimes sound cliche, but there is so much of that because I think that the people who have been following my journey and kind of getting to know me by proxy, the ones that are reaching out to me, I probably would get along with well to work, because if someone's seeing my stuff and they're like, I'm not into anything that this girl's doing, totally fine. But again, we interpersonally, culturally would probably not be a very strong match.
yeah, and it's actually interesting you bring that up, and I'm glad you've gotten a lot of interviews through LinkedIn. You know, I don't know if it's because my job searches were like maybe a little bit in the past, but for me, I found that interestingly, any company where I would advance beyond the first conversation, like nobody really talked about social media really. I mean,
Mm,
maybe I wasn't as active either as I have been the last year,
sure.
but it's just interesting that like if they want a problem solved and they want to find the right person, if anything, maybe social media, like in your case, can enhance things. But I think a lot of people worry that by trying to build a personal brand that they'll put people off. But the reality is that, the positive aspects might be highlighted. And if they don't resonate with it, then, just kind of focus on the skill set you bring to the table. You'll be fine.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big chunk of my messages too, for again, especially more entry level developers or people trying to break into tech, and talking about, like, aren't you concerned that maybe people don't like it? And it's like, yeah, man, it's the internet. I mean, I wish everyone liked me and thought I was hilarious and smart and was like, I want to hire her, but that's just not reality. But also, the same principle, in a weird sort of analogy, applies with your resume. And I'm speaking again from a recruiter's experience. Like, I don't like cover letters. I never have. I don't read them. I skip over them. Sorry. And there's going to be a huge chunk of the recruiter population, regardless of industry, who are going to think I'm totally wrong, and might disqualify a candidate for not having one. It all boils down to, whenever you're working with people, and at this point it is people hiring people, even if we are using some technologies to expedite the process, and you're just not always going to be someone's cup of tea. That's just part of it.
Yeah, that's totally right. And yeah, cover letters, I mean, I don't know if I've ever written a cover letter. I mean, maybe because that's in the field of software. I mean, maybe there are other industries where it could be valuable, but especially, I mean, there's so many tools that people could like make a cover letter sound better, that I would honestly rather like talk. If it were me, I would rather talk to the person or like learn what they were working on.
Right.
Because my guess is that probably a lot of times what people write in a cover letter, they have to talk to again anyway. So
Right.
um, I haven't done that. I mean, maybe there are people listening who find it useful, and I'm open to that perspective. But yeah,
Sure.
I haven't really found it super useful.
No, it's just, like I said, it's just a wall of text for me. And I'm like, all right, okay. But that's, again, just my experience and opinion. So, as you've sort of stepped into this coaching role, because that is not something you've always done, right? You started off just on the software side of things. And I want to know, why did you even want to? Why did that interest you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, so just to give some context, I've been in the software industry overall for, at the point of this recording, a little over 10 years. And I've been doing like tutoring, mentoring kind of thing for about like a little over 6. So, where it honestly started as, I wish I said it was from some noble place or whatever, but I was in my first job working 3 years in, and I'm like, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like I'm being appreciated. Like maybe if I try something else, like someone will value what I'm doing. And
Sure.
and they did value what I did, but I just thought like, how could I expand? How can I make more?
Sure.
Um, but when I was exploring methods to do that, and by the way, I don't know if anyone listening is familiar with like this thing called Amazon Mechanical Turk, but one of the first things I tried, it was these very, very menial tasks that would pay like cents per task.
Oh, wow.
Um, and yeah, so I tried a lot of different things, but I ended up getting into tutoring because I realized, wait a minute, I went through a lot of my undergraduate university trying to just do everything on my own. And, I was very proud, and I wish that, I knew about or thought about getting a tutor for certain things that would have helped me
Yeah,
save a lot of time and learn more quickly. And
absolutely.
um, my goals were and currently are as a tutor to, I don't want any student or professional to have to struggle entirely on their own. Now, it doesn't mean that if you're my client, I will let you struggle a little bit, but I want to help with my experience, and I learn from people I work with too. Like even if I'm the tutor, like I'm always learning. Specifically, one of the biggest programming languages I tutor in the past couple of years is called R, which a lot of people might not have even have heard of. But yeah, I tutor people, and I learn most of it by working with other people on their projects. So it's valuable, and that's kind of why I started getting into it.
And for me, from the, at this point, still very much on the student side of things, not just from a boot camp perspective, but also as I was being very aggressive with building my network, again, originally just with the intent of getting hired, but some intangibles oh my gosh, absolutely priceless ones that have come from that have been the conversations and the mentors that I've accumulated over time. And now I have these relationships with these people that, like, if I'm stuck and if I need help and I just don't know what I'm doing because I'm still new at this and I don't have all the answers, and Stack Overflow is not omniscient either. Okay. So it's like it happens, and there's so much value in having other people as resources. And I will say too, it is, I think, catapulted me in my own journey. I honestly do. I think I, am getting more offers than a lot of other people in my position, not because I'm some comparative genius, but because of my networking efforts, the brand building I've done beyond just the building and whatnot. And I really like the analogy to whenever you talk about professional coaching like you do. And there is so much value in that, to have that dedicated attention to help you navigate through all the noise. And I think, Eric, as I know you know this too, there's so much of it, there's so much that can just confuse you and derail you. And especially early on, you have to stay focused. And you talk about the repetition of pushing through in spite of those frustrations, and staying focused on your goal. And that is not easy for most people. So not only, I'm sure, are you a coach, but also your services count as mentorship and accountability partnership too, to really help keep people on track.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I think one point I want to make regarding, sort of the Stack Overflow route of learning things, Stack Overflow is a great service, and
Sure, sure.
a lot of online forums are great in that way. But one advantage that people have told me that working with someone like me has given them over something like that is that, well, first of all, Stack Overflow, if you post a question, you don't know if anyone will ever look at it. I mean,
Yeah.
usually somebody answers, and that's great. It's a volunteer community, and it's great if they get to it. But like, if somebody needs help right away, like, that's not the place to go.
No.
Um, so that's one thing. And then also, unfortunately, I have seen situations where there are people who would respond and would, act irritated towards new people, or they would be, or they would say, this question has been asked 100 times, and I promise, if I'm your tutor, I will never get upset with you if you ask a question that a lot of other people have asked. But yeah, so those are some differences too. Like, if you're considering, like, why would I work with a real human rather than just like Googling things? Those are some reasons I've found over time.
And there is also the value of having that direct communication with someone who has been there, done that, made the mistakes, learned those lessons, and the wisdom that you can impart on your clients is just so invaluable. And I think too, from a psychological standpoint, that's, I think, not addressed often enough, is how how tough it is, how it's hard to learn how to program when you're first starting out, there, and you're going to make mistakes, and stuff isn't going to work, and you don't know why it's not working, and it should be. And you're going to break things, and sometimes the problems that you're facing seem like it should be such an easy fix, but next thing you know, you've spent 3 days on it. I mean, it's just part of that hustle. And I think, especially if you are more on your own, it's going to take you longer, because you don't have that direct contact or person to help you understand those concepts better in a way that you might not have seen otherwise, or that you're just not going to get from an article online.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, there are several students I have or clients I work with that sometimes are doing all the right things, and they just want to, say, they kind of want to run by me and say, does it seem like I'm working on the right thing? Is this,
Yeah,
like, does this seem to be advancing my learning?
of course. And there are a lot of statistics out there on how many people try these courses, sign up for this boot camp. I mean, in my own boot camp experience, we had 32-ish students whenever I first started, and then only 13 of us made it to graduation. And the people that dropped out, I mean, I'm just saying, so mine was an after work part-time program, so that meant that, like, no one in my boot camp was an 18-year-old. We were all adults.
Right.
Most people had families, they'd been working in other industries for years. So that's just a bit of a different perspective. Okay. And then also, most of them who had quit, they quit way after the tuition reimbursement line. So that was thousands of dollars that they were out. Okay. But it's like, it's not easy, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It's just not. And even though I was thankful for my boot camp cohort, I had excellent teachers. They were actually very supportive. But I'm also not afraid to ask questions. So I was pinging them, bless their hearts, like all day, every day with questions or anything I was facing. And I'm so thankful for that. I think for me, it would have been much harder had I just done an online tutorial. But then again, post that, with continuing my work, having that human connection in my own network, being like, don't get discouraged that you aren't hearing back from interviewing. You've done your boot camp and no one's handed you a job yet, which in my mind at one point I thought might happen. And that's okay. There was a bit of a learning curve with that too. But it definitely takes a certain amount of grit and mental toughness to make it into this industry. And it just helps whenever you have people who are actually in your corner and can help be that sounding board for you along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, a lot of times people might wonder, especially who are getting into software, they might wonder when is it that I'm just genuinely struggling and need some help versus like I kind of recognize that software just isn't for me.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that comes down to sort of the time that you're putting in. So I kind of mentioned towards the beginning that the most common mistake I see is that people give up too early. But with that being said, if they're like working with people and collaborating and doing all the right things and they're making progress, but they just don't feel like it's right for them, then maybe you can evaluate and say, maybe software is not exactly what I want to do, or even better, if they take away something that they like about it and certain things they don't like, and then apply what they like to whatever they do choose to do. So I don't want to say that, software will be for, everybody will want to do it. But I think what I am saying is if it's something you want to do, then, just be willing to at least put the time in to see if you like it, see if you're good at it. Because I'm sure that unfortunately there's been a lot of people with great potential in software who have just stopped doing it because they gave up too early. So
Yeah, that's a great point, because I do think that is part of why some of the people dropped out in my boot camp, is they just realized that they didn't like it. And for me, I had dabbled in learning to code a little bit before I decided to make the jump into a boot camp. But I know that there's some people who kind of don't, and the next thing you know, you're going full throttle, a million miles an hour, it feels, with these tight deadlines and literally learning new languages. And although it's something I am still very excited about and I'm sticking around, I'm not going anywhere, but just not everyone's meant to be a baker or a painter either. That's okay. And sometimes you don't know until you just give it an honest shot. And I think too, one of the biggest pitfalls that people face is how sexy the tech industry can seem. You make all this money, work from home, or like if you work a big tech, you get to hang out in a nap pod in the afternoon, whatever. There are different draws, I think, that people think are going to be so great about the industry, but realistically it's long periods of time of staring at lines of code and trying to solve problems and reading documentation. And then there is also a lot more teamwork and collaboration, I think, than people realize too.
yeah, and I think when it comes to those roles, especially with the positioning of, companies that give a lot of great perks, you have to sort of remember when, if someone's giving you a great perk, then, there's probably an expectation there. And in those cases,
Yeah.
there are expectations, even with, something like, oh, I get unlimited PTO, like they're expecting, you to deliver work, like
Yeah.
when they give a perk like that. So those things are good, and people who have them are fortunate. I know there are roles that work people really hard and they don't get perks like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Absolutely.
yeah, but that's the thing, behind all of that, there's no, or at least I personally don't believe there's just an easy, like free lunch path to be successful that just requires no effort at all. There's always an expectation somewhere, there's some trade-off, and I think that's how life is.
Yeah, no, you're right. The closest example I can think of is my cats, who don't have to do anything except exist. But no, that's a great point. And so as we're sort of winding down, one thing I really want to touch on is your coaching. And I've talked to hundreds of people in this space, many of which are seasoned, and it's been great. And I think that there's kind of a natural desire for a lot of people to want to enter mentorship, whether it's as a business or just that's just something that they want to do. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. One of the biggest reasons too is as you want to advance in your career, most people want to climb some sort of ladder, make more money, totally natural. And that comes with more people managing, that comes with more coaching. Suddenly you're leading a team. And so I want to ask you, what advice would you give to maybe someone who's kind of close to that technical ceiling, right? And wants to enter either for business or just for their own personal life.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm speaking as someone who throughout my life, I love to do research, read about things in advance, like learn everything I can. But with that being said, I think the best way to learn how to be a mentor is to just start. Not that doing your research isn't important, but I think, just start small, just like try to work with one person on one thing and learn kind of what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you're planning to get into like the business of mentorship, kind of like I'm doing, I started out trying to get like a high volume of people at low prices so I could get experience starting out.
Okay.
And then after that, once I started gaining some credibility and confidence in what I was doing, I started like raising my prices. Not everyone has to adopt that strategy, but that's what worked for me.
Sure.
And yeah, just do it. And I would say also, advocate for yourself. I think, especially if you're doing something out on your own rather than for a company, it could be easy for people to try to like take advantage of you
Sure.
or to sort of like try to pay less money. But, just stand up for yourself and make sure that you can choose the people you work with just like they can choose whether to work with you or someone else.
Absolutely. So, kind of along those lines, what is your ideal client? Who are the kinds of people or levels of people that you do work with that you enjoy the most?
Yeah, I think my favorite kinds of clients are people who just genuinely want to learn, and that's regardless of the level they're currently at. You
Right.
could be super curious and already really good at the material. And also some of my favorite clients have been people who are really curious, who initially like knew nothing or felt very low confidence. But I think sort of, the drive to at least want to succeed and want to learn, if that's there, then that makes for a great client, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, that just makes sense. It's much like just a teacher having a student that's eager and active to participate in a classroom. So, totally makes sense. And also, I touched on this earlier, but of course, Eric and I have been connected on LinkedIn for several months. Very privileged to call him a friend. He's an amazing resource. But you made a post a while ago because recently ChatGPT had released a new paid tier, and is it 200 a month?
Yeah, it was, or it is.
Yeah, yeah, and
So
you signed up for it, and you were talking about your experiences, and it's like, I gotta ask, what have you done with it? What is it like?
yeah, it's amazing. So one thing I will state up front is that probably 99% of people actually don't need it
Sure,
because there's a plus tier that's right now I think 20 per month
that's what
and
I
I
use.
yeah, and I wouldn't even consider doing pro unless you're like hitting your limits on plus if you have that. And sometimes for a lot of people the free version is fine depending on what you do. But for me and for like my business and what I do, and I do a lot of coding,
Mhm.
I'm one of the probably few people who actually gets more value from the pro plan than it costs.
Okay.
Especially because like my hourly rates and all of that and like accelerating. But in terms of what I've used it for, I've used a surprising amount of the unlimited advanced voice feature.
Ah,
So like for example, I was at work and I wanted to talk with someone about what I was doing. And I'm like, like how does this sound to you? And then you can actually converse back and forth. And in the pro plan, it's unlimited, so you can talk to it as much as you want.
that's
You
cool.
know, so sometimes there's a little lag, like if you talk to it a lot. But also just for me, I think sort of the unlimited queries are key. Like if you want to, like for example, for retaining context, like if I'm working on like a big personal project and I wanted to understand all my questions, I could have this sort of like unlimited length thread about like, this is the code that did this that like
Mhm.
I wrote, like, do you have like any ideas about this? Or so I found it very valuable in that way, almost to have that second person to run it by. If I don't want to talk to another human sometimes. Uh,
The ultimate
but
software engineer's dream is
uh,
not having to talk to people.
yeah, and then I think the one other major use I've had for it is, I'm sure a lot of people listening, maybe like read a lot of news sources that talk like summarize some primary source and like have their like biased opinion.
Okay.
So a lot of what I use ChatGPT for is like I might actually sort of feed in the primary source and then have like a conversation with advanced voice being like, oh, this is what I took away. Like, what do you think of this? And then I could sort of form my own opinions without having to necessarily like read the entire primary source, but it's not just relying on headlines. So that's something I'm sure there are a lot of different uses for it. And at the point of this recording, the pro mode is still relatively new. So people are
Right.
discovering new things every day. And, I hope to share more of my findings in the future as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was so cool, and I meant to go back and like read through the comments because I know people were asking you questions, but that was a while ago. So I just thought it was fascinating because that is, as you said, the recording a newer release. So it's cool to use AI. I use it mainly for and I have the plus tier, the $20 a month tier for ChatGPT. I mainly use it for debugging for myself. I find it does a relatively good job with that too, but I don't use it so much for code generation. And there are people who do. I'm not saying don't. I'm just sharing my own practice. And that's mainly because I'm still in the stage where I'm trying to nail those fundamentals and kind of get through that grunt work myself rather than just being like, just do it for me.
Yeah, and to your point, I do think like if you're learning coding, I think you would kind of do yourself a disservice if you just like kind of rely on AI. I think
Yeah.
there's value in doing what you can on your own. But for someone like me who's like kind of been around the block, it's like a little jaded, it's a little different. Um but yeah, I mean it can be valuable, and yeah, debugging it does a pretty good job. And also what I'll say to a lot of people is like, if you get an answer from ChatGPT or any other tool like that you don't like, don't be afraid to sort of prod it a bit and say,
Yeah.
like, I don't like that. Can you like adjust it this way? And if you do that, it'll more times than not give you like a pretty good result.
Absolutely. And that I actually had this conversation with someone the other day about AI specifically and how AI doesn't like to not answer a question, right? So it's important to remember that even though it's saying, sure, here's how you do this, it does not necessarily mean that that's even a remotely accurate way or the best way to go about something. I do think it is, like I said, goes back to knowing the fundamentals. That way you have the knowledge to look at that and go, okay, yeah, but this doesn't make sense. And here's why. And then, go
No,
from
and that's a great point, because I think I tried one time, like there was some topic of discussion where like I really didn't want it to say anything if it wasn't sure. So
yeah,
I think I tried saying, like, for the questions I'm about to ask, don't, like, if you don't know the answer, like say you're unsure. And I
right.
don't I don't think it ever said that, so I don't know if it ever was unsure. Like it's kind of hard to tell, but that is a potential issue that maybe exists with the tooling, but it continues to evolve, and it's getting better at a lot of different things all the time.
It's a pretty cool time to be in this space, honestly, to witness the rise of AI and how it's affecting all of us. And it goes beyond just the tech industry too. So, Eric, as we're wrapping up, my friend, where can people find you if they want to hire an amazing, talented coach?
Yeah, so right now, I do have a LinkedIn, and if you have LinkedIn, my tag is a Career Code Pro, which is the name of my LLC. And as of recording, I'm working on a website, but I also have an email, eric@careercodepro.com. If you want to reach out, I'd be happy to speak with anybody who would like to find out more. So,
Absolutely. And I'm going to drop all your links in the description of this episode. I just want to give you a chance to give yourself a shout out. And to anyone listening, Eric's a really stand up human being. Happy to work with him. So thankful that he agreed to be a guest on my show. So thank you so much for your time.
yeah, thank you, Brooke. And, you'll get hired really soon. You're doing a lot of great things, and I appreciate being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Till next time.